Welcome everybody. I'm Jill Cox with Heritage Title. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. And as I like to do, I'm going to talk about some of the upcoming industry updates that we have. So save the dates. So first of all, don't save the date in July. We're actually going to take the month of July off. August 4th, we're still firming up the guest speaker. We've got a couple of options. So we'll announce that as soon as we have that confirmed. And then September 1st, we're going to have Scott Peterson, legal counsel for the Colorado Association of Realtors will be joining us. He's a lot of fun if you haven't seen Scott speak before. And then October 6th, we're going to have Mike Simonson, who's the CEO of Altos Research, talking to us about the market. They track every property that sells in the entire United States and analyze that weekly. And so they're really on the front end looking at different trends as we're kind of headed into some changes in our markets. And November 3rd, we're going to have a forms update with Mr. Damian Cox, Vice Chairman of the Forms Committee. So save the dates, and we hope you join us for some future industry updates. With that, I'd like to give a huge warm welcome to our guest speaker today, Liz Peetz. She's actually a repeat guest, so thank you so much for joining us again and sharing your time with us. Liz is the VP of Government Affairs for the Colorado Association of Realtors. And to give a bit of background on Liz, so she directs the public policy efforts of the Colorado Association of Realtors and manages many functions of the Government Affairs Division. She specializes in policy development, advocacy, and legislative affairs. She oversees CAR's Legislative Policy Committee and candidate endorsement process through CAR's Political Action Committee. And she is a licensed attorney in 3 states, Colorado, Nebraska, and Washington, D.C. So very impressive, Ms. Peetz.
And she's also the hardest working person at CAR.
Right.
Don't tell Ty I said that.
Yeah. So thank you so much again, Liz, for joining us today. Thanks to all of our guests. Please feel free to put questions in the Q&A section and we'll ask Liz as we go along, or Damian. So with that, I'll turn things over to you, Liz.
Thank you so much. And every year I think, oh, we'll have less to talk about this year, but I can tell you it's not the case this year. It was one of those crazy, really, really robust legislative sessions. So we had more bills on our bill sheet than we've ever had, 103 that we took positions on, another 130 that the staff just watched. For anyone who's counting, there were about 657 some bills, and most of them passed, about 78% of them passed. So we were tracking at least, a quarter of them approximately. So pretty
That's a
active
lot
for us. And, really big topics this year, I guess I would say, that are sort of big deal issues. And then a lot of really minor tweaked legislative bills, sort of like a little bit of everything. Some of this is because we're coming off of a really robust fiscal climate. And when the state has money, we want to spend all of it before they have to campaign on it. But also we're still allocating a lot of those federal dollars in many programs, including housing. And then the other thing I would tell you is because we're now past legislative session and we're thinking about who's going to be in the next legislature, there's a lot of seats that are up. All 65 seats in the House are up, and another big portion of the Senate. The potential for split control is possible this legislative season with the new competitive seats drawn by those redistricting independent commissions. So you're going to have some really good choices on your ballot box if you both in your primary and in your general. So that's why I think the legislative session policy wise was a little busy, because they know they're heading into election season.
Yeah. And you said it, and it's all been redistrict too. Yeah, that changes the dynamics of everything. So you guys are really busy with that stuff this year.
Yes, we're going to be interviewing all over the state So those of you that are, Realtor members or have Realtor member friends and clients, tell them to serve on one of our interview panels. We interview them about housing policy issues. So that's why we make our decisions. But I think, aside from us getting into elections, like, let's focus on what they did do this year, and we can segue to legislation rather than what they aspire to do next year.
Sure. Sorry.
No, you're right. I mean, it's a busy cycle for us, but I think we wanted to give you an underpinning of why it was busy.
So,
well, if you don't mind, then Damian, I'll just start off into a couple of our
please.
biggest bills. Okay.
Yeah, would you please just kind of go over the big stuff, and then we'll I'm sure people have questions on some of those too. So I think it's important for brokers to know what's been happening and how it's going to affect them.
Yes, absolutely. So I will tell you probably the 5 biggest bills we dealt with at the Capitol. Rent control, which came back again in one of the mobile home park bills, 1287. Fortunately, the final bill did not have any rent control. So we are still a state that has no rent control. That was one of the biggest battles of the session. To be honest, there's a lot of, if you have property management clients who deal, or you as a broker deal with mobile home parks, there will be new policy around notice and how long you have to, and then whether or not there's land use changes, because the bill is really working towards giving mobile home park residents more time and more process to be able to purchase their parks in the future. And with Senate Bill 160, some funding from the state. But the one thing we advocated all the way through the session was we don't want the rent stabilization, the rent control that was a minor part of the 50-page bill. And due to our advocacy and some of our other stakeholder advocacy in the housing universe, we were able to get the governor to threaten to veto the bill with rent control in it. And so that forced the bill sponsors' hands, and they had to take that out of the bill, even though they didn't want to.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't realize it was the governor that actually forced their hand. It wasn't them coming to their senses, so to speak, but.
Well, we start with the legislators, and when they don't listen to us, we go talk to the governor's office, and he agreed with us. He doesn't like that portion.
Now that's good, because it's a slippery slope. If it gets started in one area, then it could make its way to other areas in housing, which obviously would have a detrimental impact on our industry.
It's like you listen to my testimony, Damian. That's exactly why we're like, rent control doesn't work. It's just bad policy across the Republican and Democratic space. Economists agree it doesn't work. So that was
Nice.
a big win.
Yeah, it was.
The other thing we worked a lot on this session, and I would say we knew it was coming all session, but it really picked up frenzy in the last 2 to 3 weeks of session, are statewide building codes, either related to green energy or fire resiliency. So that's the other thing I'd like to mention at the beginning of the time when we were talking about how busy the session was. 300 of the 657 bills passed the legislature in the last 2 weeks. So you can imagine what my first weeks of May were like. But I mean, it's just, they were rushing to get everything done by the end of the session. And one of the things that came down to the wire was an amendment that was going to get added to either the wildfire incentives bill, 1011, or the disaster assistance bill, Senate Bill 206. And so the Fire Commission got a request from the governor to look at fire resiliency building codes, and they hemmed and hawed about it for months, and then made a recommendation that was a last minute amendment to one of those bills. And the problem, we actually have a property owner member, Sarah Thorstensen, who sits on the Fire Commission. We actually fought for that in a previous session to make sure a property owner was on the Fire Commission. It's mostly fire marshals and a couple of local government officials. And I get it. We all want fire safety and mitigation, but our biggest concern about the amendment that came forward was affordability, because if everyone is required to put $100,000 metal roof on their house, that adds a lot of unaffordableness to the state. And what you need to build in like a fire adjacent community or fire risk adjacent community in Summit County is so different than the urban core or what you can actually build in some of our mountain resorts. So the amendment didn't have any affordability language in it. So we objected to it strongly without any affordability, and ourselves and the local governments, municipals, counties objected to it so much that the amendment got scrapped. And so that didn't happen, but we will be dealing with the issue for next session as we try to write a better balanced fire resiliency code bill. And then I should say the other bill, the green energy bill, which is 1362, that one actually was really balanced. So like that one took all session to get to a final phase. There were like 50 different amendments between the House and the Senate from the original version of the bill, whereas the fire code was like a last minute one. The green energy code bill, it's so much better now from where it started. When it started, it was a mandate from and rulemaking authority for the Department of Energy that basically said every local government has to adopt these yet to be written 2024 energy codes. So it was sort of an odd bill because you're requiring local governments to pass something that hasn't even been written yet.
Nice.
And I don't know, that just doesn't sound like good policy to me.
Maybe let us review it first before you make us accept it.
Right. Well, and then the other problem we had with it was that there was not local government representation on the code writing board. So the final bill has a lot of really good things in it because it has affordability requirements that they have to consider when they write the code. It changes the board from like a small representation of less than 10 to up to 16 different people, including local governments, including some of the construction trades and home builders who understand what building code regulations mean for how much it's going to cost to build. But there's also exemptions for if your house is destroyed by a natural disaster, like the Marshall Fire victims, they don't have to build back to the same code, or they can at least request a waiver. And then the other thing that's really good in the bill is its joint authority from the Department of Local Affairs and the Department of Energy, which we think is a good step forward because the Department of Local Affairs has done some really good affordable housing policy, including homeownership, like the 1271 bill we passed last year. So this green building code bill is in so much better place than where it started.
That's great.
So yeah, building codes, fun.
Building codes, yes, all sorts of fun stuff. Well, the fire one is interesting. Obviously, it was a knee-jerk reaction to the Marshall Fire and everything else as they frantically tried to push it through. And I remember conversations with you and others that they didn't seem to be really looking at that affordability issue. And it sounds like that never got resolved. So you're going to have to try it again next session.
Yes, that'll be something the Wildfire Matters Interim Committee looks at, and we find a more balanced policy going forward, because I do think we all want fire resiliency in our properties, but the question of cost really varies, right? If it's $2,500 to remove a tree versus $100,000 to put on a metal roof, consumers need options, because if you have to like spend $100,000 when you remodel your bathroom, most people aren't probably going to ask for a permit if they have to comply with something that makes it that astronomically expensive.
No, good point. Yeah, that's a great point. And the brokers on here already know we have problems with sellers that get permits.
Yes.
What's your next one?
Okay, so I do want to get to some of the fire mitigation bills and the insurance reform bills, but I want to get to one of the other bigger topics first, and that's Senate Bill 238. This is what I'm calling property tax ballot deal. So essentially,
oh yeah, this is a good one.
Yeah. For those of you that have been hearing me talk about what's on the statewide ballot or what was coming, we were pretty worried about it. There were supposed to be 5 to 7 housing measures, whether it was
Liz, why don't you back up just a smidge to tell people what the problem was first, so they can understand where this came from, or what was trying to be addressed with the ballot issues and everything else. Because I don't know if everybody has the background on what happened after we de-Gallaghered and all that other stuff.
Oh yeah, that is a good point. So was it just last year or 2 years ago?
It was 21.
I mean, they're like dog years in policy world, but
yeah, exactly.
We decoupled Gallagher, so the residential and commercial property tax rate are no longer connected. And the reason they wanted to decouple it from the proponent's point of view was commercial is so high in property tax compared to residential. And if we untether it, maybe we'll get some relief. I hate to say I told you so, but what Carr said was, be careful what you wish for. We don't know what the unintended consequences are. And what that now means is policymakers have the ability to affect property tax for commercial and residential separately without having them be tethered. And you guys have all seen the really high prices of housing and how much your property tax valuation has increased, what your potential property taxes might be in 2 to 3 years. So
yeah, particularly since the study period, it went up substantially last time, and the study period was only through July of 2020 or June of 2020, which was before we saw this takeoff.
Yes, and I think whether you think the housing market is continuing to be sky high or it will taper off with the high interest rates, there are studies out there that show that it could be a very high increase whenever we hit the next assessment cycle. And so that kind of propelled all these conversations around how can we make sure people aren't priced out of their homes by property taxes alone if your valuation went up and you're on sort of a fixed income. So that proceeded to result in a ballot measure filed by Colorado Concern that it was like Prop 13 in California that
you might have to tell people what you might have to tell people what Prop 13 did, because that was a disaster. But
yeah, so the short, non-crazy policy long version is Prop 13 in California is like the third rail of California politics, just like Medicare is for and Medicaid for the National Congress. It's that issue that people love and hate at the same time. And what it does is tie the property tax valuation increase to a certain percentage. And California's was retroactive, so it was really bad because it tied it into something that was based on the transfer of the sale. So you could live across the street from one neighbor who bought their house 5 years ago, whose property taxes are higher than when you bought yours because it was stabilized by this artificial market control. And then when you would try to move, you would face this high new tax rate because you're buying a new property. And there were a lot of problems in California with it tying up the housing market because there wasn't this portability of the tax benefit. And so it's really caused a lot of problems in California, and some other states have passed it, but they all fund education very differently than Colorado does. We have mandates in our constitution where a certain amount of property taxes have to go back to backfill. So I hate saying Colorado is so different, but we are with Tabor and Amendment 23 and all these things that you can't say what works in this state is going to work in our state without unintended consequences.
Yeah, so when the taxes went up after this de-Gallagher and everything else, then we had these ballot initiatives that people were trying to pass. And then I think that sets up this bill that was passed. So can you talk about what the agreement was to try and stop bad policy coming into us at the ballot box?
Yes. So when the Colorado Concern Group filed this ballot measure that was like Prop 13 in California, like 5 different versions of it, at least, maybe more, at the title board to get approved. Then other groups filed ballot measures in response, like the Bell Policy Center filed a luxury tax measure of any real estate valued at 2 million or more has to pay this annual fee. The conservative groups filed a separate ballot measure that says we just want permanent property tax reduction, which in Colorado, because we fund local revenue with schools, fire districts, and that sort of stuff with property tax revenue, that would have been like a cut to those local revenue sources. And then other ballot measures around locals get to decide all property taxes. So like I could say oil and gas gets taxed at one rate and residential gets taxed at another rate, but it'd be this patchwork approach of whatever the local voters approve, which is also unpredictable revenue. So you had all these jockeying groups trying to say, my housing measure is the best and this is the great solution. And meanwhile, we at CAR are like, if you have to vote on all that on your ballot, well, I'm really worried about the housing market stalling out. So the grand bargain deal of Senate Bill 238 puts in place a very complicated property tax system for the next couple of years. But for 2 years, we're going to reduce property taxes for residential, and for the very, very first time, commercial. We're getting a reduction. We've never had that before. And then in 23 and 4, we go back to the 293 bill that was like temporary reduced property taxes that were from the pandemic, and the $10,000 deferral of your property taxes. And then we go back to normal property taxes in 25 and 26. And all of this grand bargain, funded with some Tabor refund money, some other sources, keeps
COVID
everyone
relief
from
money,
their
right?
ballot measure.
Wasn't COVID relief money used for it too?
Yeah, they sort of scrapped from a bunch of different sources: general fund, COVID relief, and some Tabor refund money. And that one bill keeps 5 ballot measures from going forward. So we're fans of it, even though your property tax system is super complicated right now or for the next 6 years.
So does that mean something's going to come next year, that they're going to try and work something more permanent, or you think that this is the way it is for at least a couple of years until it rolls off again?
That's a good question, Damian. I mean, I think I could see both versions of it. And I think a lot of this will depend on where the housing market goes in the next year or two. Some of it may depend on who wins the Denver mayoral election, since Senator Hansen was one of the biggest proponents of changing the way we do property taxes. And if he gets elected Denver mayor, he's not a state legislator anymore. So we'll see. I think these conversations on property taxes, though, are going to continue every year. I just don't know what the new version will be that we look at next year.
Well, that'll be exciting.
Never a dull moment.
Taxes and building codes. You really know how to party.
Yeah. Get to know your assessor and your local builder. That's the moral of that story.
All right. What do you got out? What else you got?
Short-term rentals. We had this really big thought that there was going to be a ton of policy on short-term rentals this session, and we had a bill title pulled just in case we needed it. What we're really watching for is folks wanting to say, just because you rent out a room in your house or you have a second home, we're going to declare that mixed income or mixed use, and now you're going to be taxed commercially, which is a 4 times the rate difference. We didn't see any of those bills come forward this year. We may see some next year in the future, but the one bill that did go forward that we ended up supporting and really liked is a way that lets local governments allocate lodging tax revenue in new ways. Most of the time they are used by for tourism reasons, marketing your community. And now we're going to be doing a method where they can use it to support their local civil service workforce and housing creation. So that's a really good development, and we really like the bill.
Nice. Oh, you okay?
Good. I'm about to be in transit, so I'm not driving, but my partner is.
Okay.
and I should tell you that bill number. That bill was House Bill 1117.
1117. Okay.
And I think I said we'd get to some of the wildfire mitigation bills and insurance reform bills. So what's really exciting is we've been focusing on wildfire mitigation for several sessions, and we're finally spending money, 5 to 7 bills. We're gonna improve forest health, improve our tree nursery, continue the landowner tax credit for individual wildfire mitigation. We're going to give matching grants to local governments, and we are going to do fire suppression ponds that allow you to use water differently for mitigation, and insurance reform. So 2 bills around insurance reform and disaster assistance. That is 1111 and Senate Bill 206. We're actually going to give homeowners or property owners money to help them build back stronger and cleaner, which is great to have incentive money. And then we're also in insurance reform. The bill cleans up the petition and sort of inventory list process after your home is destroyed. It extends that time frame so you have more time and you have a point of contact with your insurance company, and sort of standardizes some of the coverage requirements. But also, really importantly, it helps us take on a study to study the underinsurance issue. And so the Insurance Commission is going to be working on that probably now into next session. But we know that was a big issue for all the Marshall Fire victims, and it'll be interesting to see what they come up with.
So are they studying to try and figure out how to help homeowners make sure that they're not underinsured? I assume that's or rules around barriers as to what they're supposed to do to make sure they aren't underinsured. Is that the gist of it?
They're studying how do we fix the problem in general. And I think the insurance company is going to be a partner in that. We really want to make sure the insurance industry continues to function so that we can sell real estate. But I don't think they know how to tackle it yet. I think it'll just be, let's all get ourselves around the table and figure it out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, there was a question here that says, what's the plan for forest health, and will it include controlled burns, or do you know anything more around that? Or
yeah, that's a great question. So the forest health money is money that you can use in your community to work in, say, like national park land or land that's not owned by the city or not owned by a private landowner, but it gives communities the ability to work with sort of the folks who own the land, that the national park system, the Forest Service, those kinds of things. But it's funding. There's not like a requirement of how they tackle it, but it's funding, which is so the first time we've seen the funding for that. The controlled burns issue, there was a separate bill on that. That's 1132. And so when you do a controlled burn, you're going to have fire professionals know that you're doing it and maybe be on site to watch when you're doing it. They made some exemptions for some of the agricultural burns and things that are agricultural processes so that our farmers and ranchers don't have problems, but that's what we're doing on controlled burns.
And that's a touchy one too, considering a couple of the fires that we've had recently were touched off by controlled burns.
Yeah, that's funny that you mentioned that. We were just talking about that at lunch of like, have they actually declared the actual reason for the Marshall Fire? And I don't think we've seen the final reason.
Yeah, I don't know if that one was a controlled burn or not. They started with electrical power line, and then I think that was debunked, but I'm not sure. But
yes.
So, well, great. Do you have any other bills you want to talk about, or you want to talk about our future?
Well, yeah, I mean, we can talk about some of the fair housing bills and
Great.
some of the really minor real estate bills that we were able to sort of get rid of. Like, I want to start with 1036. So the land surveyors had this misconceived notion that it's unclear whether or not you're getting a survey or an ILC. Obviously, one is more costly.
Oh
And
God, yes, I was involved in this one.
yeah, Damian knows this issue. The original bill draft tried to say, let's change the contract to buy and sell. Well, for those of you who know your contract to buy and sell, it's in, I think, paragraph 9. Vice Chair of the Forms, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think it's 9.
And so we were kind of like, well, you don't really need to change the contract to buy and sell. It's already there. And so they still wanted to run the bill. They still thought it was an issue, that people were concerned or unclear, and consumers were just asking a lot of questions. So Scott and Damian and mortgage lenders and groups of ours, we all talked to the bill sponsor and said, hey, look, what you really probably meant to address was the closing statement. And by the way, we don't need legislation for this. We can actually just work through the regulatory process. And so the Forms Committee, in their April meeting, is that right, Damian?
Yeah, we finished it up in March, and then I think it was approved in April. That they changed literally changed the closing statement by adding one line that says ILC underneath the survey. It was dumb. But my personal favorite about it is that they changed the real estate commission approved form, and that removed the need for this legislation apparently, but it's a form that literally nobody uses. So I don't know what they really accomplished in this, but I was happy to change a form that no broker has ever used, but whatever. So yeah, that was a dumb one.
Yes. And so once the Forms Committee acted, the bill died in committee because it never should have been legislation in the first place. But sometimes we do minor things to make the policy environment better. And that's one of those examples of we corrected someone from running a bill they don't need to run.
Yeah, exactly. That was yeah. And anyways, go on, because I have lots to say about that, but I won't take up your time. So
yeah, I mean, the other thing that I think is a big thing, if you are not following it already, is some of the fair housing changes. 2 bills kind of dealing with that, and then some criminal sealing record issues. So House Bill 1102 is a bill we worked on a lot. Veterans and military classes in fair housing. I think there's a few other states that have this, maybe 11. But for Colorado, the biggest deal for us is, and the home builders, we wanted to make sure there weren't issues around, for example, HUD appraisals, FDA loans. I mean, we didn't want, as a consumer, you to violate the Fair Housing Act because you accepted conventional financing. That should just still be a consumer choice. So there's an exception written into the bill for that. There's an exception written in for specific appraisal issues. And then also on a lot of our military bases, especially in Colorado, people advertise, like just like putting something up on the bulletin board, hey, I'm getting transferred. I want to sell my house or rent my house back to another veteran. Well, you wanted to make sure pro-veteran policy wasn't being hurt by this attempt to protect veterans.
Yeah, that's a good catch.
Yeah, I mean, because we're not intending to hurt veterans, we're intending to help them have more access to housing.
Yeah.
The other bill, 1082, creates a new fair housing unit in the Attorney General's office. Really, we never really liked the bill at all, but we wanted to make sure it was very narrow so that it doesn't affect home ownership, and really is tailored narrowly to rental and keeping up with the registration fees and every time there's a property transaction and somebody complains. So there's, I think we'll have to continue to watch that for mission creep and make sure that the fair housing unit in the Attorney General's office doesn't get expanded in a way that makes it hard to do housing transactions.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Oh,
I
and
had
I
a
also
question.
mentioned.
I had a question
Oh,
here
go
real
ahead.
quick. I'll ask just before you get into some others. Somebody asked, is there anything new on landlord tenant law?
Not much this year. We did so much last year that they were a little quiet this year. So not much.
Yeah, the last 2
property
years was
management
enough, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they did a lot the last couple of years. I think the closest thing is the Mobile Home Park Act. There were, I think, a couple of issues around HOAs, to the extent that those touch on property management, that we got involved in. There were, I think, 4 or 5 HOA bills. One allows, changes the law around escalating fees. So 1137 is addressing the Green Valley Ranch problems. If you've been reading along in the press about that, there were a bunch of foreclosures in that property done by the HOA because people had escalating amenity fees, which, I mean, I don't think you should be kicked out of your house if your grass isn't the right height. That's crazy. So the bill changes to have a lot more notice around when you get fees, and then payment plans to be able to pay off those fees. They tried to overreach the bill too much. They tried to say foreclosures can't be over a certain amount in price. And we said, well, you're going too far. You're messing with the foreclosure process. We don't want to change the law around that for the market. But we do think you shouldn't be kicked out of your house because your amenities are not up to the HOA code standard.
Yeah, those bills were problematic, but those were some of the ones you were talking about that were kind of rushed through in the 11th hour. Because I know Section Council had comments and amendments for several of those bills, and they didn't even make it to get an amendment stance before the thing passed. Yes,
they're moving fast and furious, and that includes a bill that the governor just vetoed last Friday, 1387, which would have put in place a bunch of different requirements around reserve studies. The bill
that got vetoed.
Yeah, it got vetoed last Friday.
Wow.
So, I mean, and the governor said this is because it'll increase costs to homeowners. The bill was meant to address the condo collapse issues in Florida and say you can't neglect the emergency cost of the common areas. You have to start actually funding the reserve studies. But yeah, that bill was vetoed by the governor, so they'll try again next session on that.
Yeah, that was the case down in Miami where they neglected the swimming pool on the roof for years, and it rusted everything out, and the whole thing collapsed. And I think the boards are now being sued. All of the insurance is gone, and so now they're suing the board members and everything else. But so you can see some reasons for the bill, but you can also see the cost that would be involved. It's a fine line to run.
Yep.
So I didn't realize it had been vetoed. I thought that one had been passed.
Just last Friday it was vetoed.
Wow. So
he only vetoed 3 bills, and one of them is that bill.
Wow. Okay. Well, what else you got?
While we're on the subject of HOAs, we also passed a couple of minor bills around public rights of way. I think that's 1139. And it's kind of a funny bill. It's like making sure they don't over-regulate where you can park and things like that. I think it's a Colorado Springs issue that it's tied to. And then I think there's one more HOA bill, but it's escaping my brain today. But those are the closest things to property management that we really dealt with, or landlord tenant. Not many pieces of policy. There's one bill that cleaned up, Senate Bill 19, the sealed eviction records, and I mentioned sealed records a minute ago. We're allowing additional people to have access to that file. Apparently they didn't think about attorneys being able to access files for clients they represent, which we were all kind of like, oh, we thought they had access. They don't? Okay, that's fine. They should get access to that, represent their clients on either side of the case.
Yeah, that was probably a good cleanup, but it's nice. I mean, the plus side for all of you out there that do property management, what it means is you don't have to rewrite your lease for the first time. You know, you've had to rewrite it for the last 2 or 3 years. Guess what? You can use the same lease for a year. Isn't that going to be fantastic?
Yeah, isn't that one of the new forms coming out that they're going to work on at the lease or something?
Oh, there's a lease. That's the lease assignment. The forms committee is not going to create a lease. I hate to say that to everybody because I know that there's a lot of people that would love it if they did, but it's just not going to happen. So I will continue to work on the real estate section council to see if we can get them to approve something. It's just leases are hard when it comes to consumer protection because you're supposed to balance this, and it's hard to balance landlord tenant. I mean, it's getting more and more in this state that it's balanced, but it's still not equal power. So that makes it difficult. But yeah, so if you've created your lease for the last, I know, I see Rob is on here. So he probably created a lease in 2019, another one in 2020, another one in 2021, but you're done now. You can keep it for a couple of years.
That's good news. Certainty. I like that.
Yeah, look at that. I mean, at least you don't have to pay to have somebody draw one up again. So Liz, you want to talk a little bit about, I mean, you kind of mentioned at the beginning about the maps and redrawing and everything else. And I guess, to me, this election cycle is going to be important because housing has been something that's been important. And you guys have been playing a lot of defense in the last several years because some of the policies have not been consistent with what works for our industry. Do you want to talk about that and again, make a plea for the people to help with your interviews and that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we really try to find what we call Realtor champions, which means they understand housing policy and the housing market and property rights. And we don't care if they're an R or a D, as long as they continue to be smart about their housing policy. Last year, we worked on the Century of Opportunity campaign legislation and really got involved in creating good public policy. This year at the session, we were really involved a lot around the issues of how we spend our federal funds, the ARPA dollars, the American Rescue Act plans. And we did some significant things here in Colorado that other states have not yet done. I suspect they'll follow our lead. In total, we're allocating about $393 million to affordable housing across the entire continuum. But there's like 7 bills, and that's not even including the homeless prevention bill. But the main ones that Carr worked on that we're going to sort of be reinforcing with all of our interviews of like, do you support this kind of policy, are around. So two big ones, Senate Bill 159 and House Bill 1304 were just signed this week by the governor. One creates a $178 million grant program to local governments. And the other one, 159, allocates $150 million into a revolving loan fund, which is really important because that'll be situs that continues to grow. So the profits get fed back into the program. Both of these are meant to help local governments create housing along the entire housing continuum. And the biggest deal with these bills is fighting for AMI that is a statewide approach. So up 0 to 120 in the urban core, 140 in the rural, and up to 170 in what we call the rural resorts. And then also one other final bill is $40 million to incentivize economic jobs in modular housing and manufactured housing and create it. It could be 3D printing, it could be tiny homes, it could be prefabricated panel siding. That's a first in the nation approach. So we're pretty proud of that bill. And then also the 1242 bill that creates a tiny home legal structure. So local governments can say, hey, I want that in my community, but here are the standards. So if you're going to put it in place. We want to see good policy like this is balanced. And I hope that that's what our interviews bring about, housing champions.
Nice. Yeah, you guys did a lot of stuff on the affordable housing. I forgot about those 3 bills this year, but I know you did a ton last year on work on the affordable housing bills. And we're expecting to start seeing some of that stuff kind of take implementation as it goes. Have you heard any about the implementation so far on the ones you had last year? Or?
Yeah, thanks for asking. We got a briefing from DOLA a month or so ago, and I should get a new update pretty soon. But the 1271 grant program, we already know they've awarded nearly 3/4 of the money. Grants have have been awarded all over the state. And we're super excited to see them take up small square footage units, expedited permitting, long-term zoning and regulatory barriers being removed. I think it's going to make a drastic difference. And what we're super excited to see is that people are using the program, and the DOLA, the Department of Local Affairs, I think they call themselves, it's either community navigator or community like development folks, the folks that sort of work on the local government angle of it, have been really pleased to see really creative, innovative projects that meet the community's needs come forward. We're very proud of that bill. And the 1134 bill, which is also a first in the nation Colorado approach we passed, is a renters being able to build their credit to prepare for home ownership. CHAFA, the organization that runs the program, is supposed to give us an update in about a month. And from what we heard, they think it's one of their most dynamic new programs. So that's really exciting.
Wow, that's huge success. That's fantastic with all of those.
Yeah, we're thrilled. And then 1028 is the bill that actually requires the state to report out how they spend their housing dollars. Imagine this, we never knew how we were spending them before we wrote the legislation to say we have to actually tell people how we spend our dollars.
No, that's great. That sounds like you're seeing some success from those bills you ran last year. That's wonderful.
Yeah, we're excited that our century of opportunity is making a real difference in housing policy in our state.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what states follow suit, because as you see success, you see other states starting to copy. But
hey, I'm just happy to see Fannie and Freddie take up something we started. That's cool.
That's true. That is true. So, any other questions before we let you go? Jill, you see anything?
I don't. Does anybody have any questions out there? Thank you for such a great update, Liz.
Yeah, thank you for all your hard work down there at the legislature. I know that it's not a lot of people know exactly what go. Oh, here's one. How do you become a realtor champion? That's Eric
I like
Romero
that
wants
question.
to know.
Well, so we have a candidate questionnaire that we use every year when we interview candidates. You know, they can be standing issues like wildfire mitigation or transportation policy or transfer taxes. We don't like them. But if you are running for a state legislative office, state house or state senate, we interview everyone who's running. And if we endorse you as a realtor champion, it means we think you are viable. You're going to potentially have a campaign and strategy to win, but also you care about the housing issues and you align with realtor values and private property rights. I know a lot of our local boards also have local questionnaires. So if it's a local candidate, go through your local board of realtors. And if you don't know who that is, you could ask myself, or maybe Damian knows, since he's on the road show with Scott all the time.
Yeah, I actually don't, but so I know that there's.
Well, then just ask me, and I'll point you to the right board.
Liz.
But essentially, it's interview and be good on housing policy. That's how you become a realtor champion.
And then I would be remiss if I didn't. LaDawn pointed out that, you know, join RPAC, which I think it's important for everybody on here, that, and most of the people on here already know how important that is. I mean, this is really, guys. This is what protects your industry. This Liz and the work that her crew is doing is really, I mean, they're doing the yeoman's work to make sure that you have an industry that you can thrive in, and that there is a housing market, and that there is consumers and people can buy and sell houses, and protecting those property rights. It really is important that you be members of that if you haven't. So I know that Liz doesn't do that call to action, but I will do it for you, because it really is something that that your industry has that a lot don't. Like I said, the Real Estate Section Council thought that they were going to pass some amendments on some things that were bad for lawyers, and the legislature just kind of went right blowing past them. Whereas it's harder for them to do that with CAR because of your guys' participation in RPAC. So, so with that, Liz, do you have any final parting remarks before we let you go on your way and finish up your day?
I would just say thank you for being engaged and wanting to learn about what's going on at the Capitol. Things affect you and your clients and consumers so drastically and so quickly, and ideas spread fast. So I'm happy for those that want to invest in RPAC. That helps us be at the table and not on the menu. So we really appreciate your engagement, because you help us, give us that voice to the policy fights down there.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time, Liz. It's, as always, it was fantastic. Jill, you have anything else?
Yeah, just another big thank you to Liz. Thank you so much for your advocacy and what you do for our industry. We're just so fortunate to have you out there advocating for this profession. So thank you. And thank you so much for your time today. I know you're very busy. I love that you're like the Lincoln Lawyer. If anybody's seen that Netflix series.
She's got her seatbelt on and still doing
She's in
her
the back
job.
seat of a Lincoln right now, getting driven around to her next big case. So all right. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Liz.
Yep.
Bye.